Welcome to The Growing Band Director, the podcast that dives into topics applying to all of us band directors. My name is Kyle Smith, and joining me is my friend and colleague, Jeff Smith. Together, we discuss many aspects of a school band program, including how to build your concert, jazz, and marching programs, as well as everything else we do as band directors. More importantly, we'll discuss concepts that help us all improve our own programs every day. Always remember the famous quote by Ray Kroc, "When you're green, you're growing, and when you're ripe, you rot." Let's get started. All right, we made it to school vacation week, and I am so excited. Jeff, how are you today?
Great, how are you?
Very good. Alan King, brass instructor extraordinaire, guru of all things brass. We're so excited to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and I really appreciate being here. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm so excited to be here at school vacation week, and just want to do a shout out to all the listeners and all the subscribers and people who are contacting us about enjoying the podcast and all the things that we're able to share with you guys. And a big shout out to Ryan, who reached out this week with some words of encouragement, and wanted to say a thank you, Ryan, for that. And it's been really nice to keep this going. It's just nice to see that there's a market and a desire for people to learn about teaching band, and this is why we do this. So thanks everybody for that. A couple quick ads before we get started. You guys have heard me talk about Banjo Music. They carry used instruments in excellent playing condition, including a 6-month limited warranty for great prices. It's right here in Cape Elizabeth, Maine, and Joe Betancourt does a great job at bandjoemusic.com. That's banjomusic.com. And great guy, great repair technician. If you haven't checked that episode out, please do so. He's just fantastic. And the other business we like to promote a lot is Maine Saxes. They're a one-on-one saxophone specialty shop providing expert repairs, sales, and private lessons for saxophones in New Gloucester, Maine. That's just north of Portland. At Maine Saxes, they work with you individually by appointment so you can get personalized attention, whether you need saxophone repairs or you're shopping for a horn, mouthpiece, reeds, or accessories. They offer a carefully curated selection of overhauled vintage and modern saxophones so you can test them in person knowing they are playing at their full potential, as well as some of the finest new handmade mouthpieces like Aaron Drake and Morgan. So they're at mainsaxes.com. That's MAINE saxes.com for more information. So please check those out. We're very excited to bring this episode that we're calling Brass Problems to everybody. As a brass player, I always feel like I know what I'm doing, and then I have students who can't play something and I can't fix it. And I realize I need to talk to Alan about how to teach brass better. So, even as a brass player, this is an episode that I'm really looking forward to. So, Alan, would you give us just maybe a 30-second intro as to what you do and your philosophy?
Sure. Well, it all came, it's interesting, probably not to anyone else but me, but I didn't know it, but I started wrong, playing incorrectly. And the first 9 people that I took lessons with, paid to take lessons with, didn't understand the embouchure and the process of playing. Some of them were very good players. I just remember one of my trumpet teachers in college, when I kind of talked to him about, hey, this isn't working, what we're doing, I'm not getting any better. And he actually said to me, teaching's difficult. When I was 9, somebody gave me a cornet, and I apparently played correctly from day one. So my teachers never talked about this stuff because they didn't want to mess me up. So he said, I don't completely understand it. Well, I found that a lot of people didn't completely understand it. So I was practicing more than everybody else, and they were better than me. And so I figured I got to do something. I either have to find another thing to do in life or figure out what's going on. So I started buying books. I own well over 100 books on brass playing. And what I kind of came to realize is some of the books, well, let's take the Arvin book. Arvin was a great teacher, but a lot of what he wrote in his book was misinterpreted. For instance, he's French. So when he wrote the syllable TU as the syllable to tongue with, he didn't mean to, he meant te. which is TU in French. So it's more of a, not a, and that really messed up a lot of people, because the 2 syllable is a much lower tongue position. So it's a lower note. And you get kids trying to play higher, saying 2 all the way up, and they stop at like 4th space E on trumpet, you know? So that helped. And then I found, first of all, Trent Austin, who I had a few lessons with, who really gets it. And he kind of started me on the path. And then more recently, Phil Snedeker, who's a trumpet teacher at Hart School of Music, University of Connecticut. And it's interesting, some of the stuff he told me, he's a really cool guy. He knows a lot, but he also knows everybody. He was on a gig with Marty Hackelman, who was the French horn player with the Empire Brass Quintet, with Rolf Schmedvig, those guys. And he said, Marty said, hey, let me show you something. And so they're sitting around talking about brass playing, these guys that are great players, and they're sharing information. And some of that information he shared with me started to work. And he said, look, you got to get in touch with Peter Bond from the Metropolitan Opera. He's got a book that's not out yet, but it covers a lot of this stuff. So it took a while, but Peter finally got his book out. It's called The Singing Trumpet. And a lot of words, not as many exercises, but he really, really deeply explains some of the problems with brass playing. And how Peter came about this, he got the job with the Met. And after about a year, he was having problems. And the guy next to him, whose name was Jim Pandolfi, he said, I'd watch him and it was effortless. Whatever he did, whether it was playing a soft solo or the Brandenburg Concerto number 2, which is a famous piccolo trumpet. Yeah. He said he looked the same. So we started studying with him. And that's where these concepts kind of come from, of almost the opposite of what some books say, believe it or not. So that's kind of what kind of, shot a bit of adrenaline into me. Right. Like, wow, this works. So I want to help kids with it. So that's where it comes from.
That's so great. We're really looking forward to unlocking a lot of this stuff today, because I know a lot of people who listen are not brass teachers or brass players at all. And hopefully the stuff we're going to do is going to help. So we do have some problems that we're going to address. But problems are going to be like if a student has a pinch sound or lack of range or endurance, unclear tonguing and flat low notes or a small sound, things like that. But before we start, like, Alan, if you were able to give like 2 or 3 things that are really essential as kids first learn, say, the trumpet, right? Like starting 101 in, what are some really basic easy to understand things that teachers need to know?
And thank you, I will. And it's not just trumpet. It's really, at least the basics are the same on all the brass instruments. You might do less of something, obviously on tuba, you don't have to do as much with range, but it's still the basic thing. So, and I really feel like beginning, for those of you out there that aren't brass players, try to spend more time on the embouchure. We talk about air way too much. Air does not make the sound. Vibration makes the sound. Air causes the vibration. But I hear band directors just talk about air and they never talk about the embouchure. I use plenty of air, but through a bad embouchure, and I got bad results. So the first thing is to try to have the lips in somewhat of an M position. Now, for some kids, that's easy. For other kids, they can't really feel that. So what I do with them is I have them actually hum while they put the mouthpiece on.
When you say an M, you mean like shaped like an M, like your corners are down a little bit?
Yeah, and like they're saying the letter M. But for some kids, they'll do it perfectly. I know there's no video, but they'll do it perfectly. But then once the mouthpiece touches the lips, they change it.
Yep. And so the corners are tight and the whole mouth is flat, right?
Yeah. And Doc Severinsen said something that really hit with me. He said, the part of your lip that's inside the cup has to stay relaxed and flexible, not wide open, but it has to stay flexible. a lot of these problems, pinch sound, lack of range and endurance, come with the lips being too tight. And when the lips are too tight, the center's too tight, and you have to blow harder just to get a sound. So it's like I tell my students, I'm just using an arbitrary thing here, but if I can create a sound with 10 pounds of air pressure and it takes you 100 pounds of air pressure, who do you think is going to last longer?
Yeah.
You know, the harder we blow, the harder the corners have to hold. And these are very small muscles. They get tired very fast. So the M position.
So once they have that M position, let's talk about like where the tongue is and how to articulate, or do you teach them the tongue right away, or where's the touch in the back and the front and all those things?
So the M position is first. And then at least changing notes. We really want to teach changing notes with tongue position. Each note has a tongue position. And I'm talking about more not the front of the tongue, but closer to the middle of the tongue. Like if we say ta and then we say ti, you can feel the middle of the tongue rising. And when the tongue rises, the air gets faster.
Similar to when we whistle.
Yes. And what a lot of kids do is to get the air faster, they leave the tongue flat and they blow harder. And that causes lots of problems. So getting them just aware of the middle of the tongue moving up and down to change notes is a huge thing. And it takes some kids a while because, you know, you go to Mexico and you get a little 9-year-old kid that can just tongue a million miles an hour, and they use their tongue more in their language. They're rolling their tongue at 3 years old. So they're very aware. Here, some kids, I say, where is your tongue? And they can't even tell me. So it can be tricky. Yeah. So M, and then I have them just get a note out and then teach them right off the bat. I teach simple lip slur, whether it's concert F to concert low B flat, whatever, and just get them used to trying not to move their embouchure and just moving their tongue. And that's tricky for a lot of kids. They want to move their lips. Mm-hmm. And if you can get them to keep them more still. As far as tonguing, I really believe that the natural language, our language, and kind of where our body goes is the best thing. So I just start having a kid say ta and ask them where their tongue hits, the tip of their tongue when they say ta, and then have them have that tongue hit in the same spot to start a note. But I think it's important to tell students that tonguing isn't really about the tongue. The tongue doesn't make the sound. It's the air pressure against the tongue, and then the tongue releases. And so they got to get that feeling of that air releasing, making the sound, and not just their tongue flapping.
And would you say that in general, that touches sort of half top teeth, half the red on top, and that one of the biggest issues is when students tongue between their teeth and their tongue is low, so they get like a TH sound?
Yes, I really love what Jack Burrett said. He said, if a kid can flutter tongue, you know, have them flutter tongue, and wherever the tip hits, that's where it should hit to tongue notes, because that's their natural position. Yeah. I really like that. Now, there is an occasional kid that has trouble with that. And occasionally I will teach something called dorsal tonguing. It's also called anchor tonguing, but I don't like that word because it tells people that the front of the tongue is anchored. But it's when the tip stays down and you go ta 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 with just back of the front of the tongue. Unfortunately, a lot of pros play that way. I'm finding out Al Vizzuti, you know, all the guys in the Met, a lot of guys in the New York Philharmonic, they play that way. Herbert L. Clarke, that was how he ended up with his tonguing. He claims that he changed tonguing 3 times in his life, and he ended with the dorsal tonguing. If you get a kid that just can't get their tongue up where it normally is, I would teach dorsal tonguing and allow them to keep the front of the tongue down, because otherwise they're going to quit because they can't do it the normal way. So we have to be flexible with this. But I think flutter tongue, feel where the tip hits, and then just have them say ta.
Yeah.
For some kids, when they say ta, their tongue gets really low, so you've got to switch the syllable. So it's kind of troubleshooting. all of this is kind of, you start with something and then you adjust it.
Jeff, you want to jump in?
No, I agree 100%. The only thing that I used to do differently was that instead of saying ta, I did t, because it prevented the tongue from going in that flat level all the time. And when I first taught kids the tongue, it was T for two is terrible. So they learned that E sound, and it allowed the lips, the M feeling is that's the way to do it.
Yes. And you're right. For some kids, the T is great. What I run into occasionally is a kid that over pronounces the T and their corners go out.
Yeah.
And once you get a smile embouchure, the center tightens and then you got problems. But you're right. T is a better position after, even for some right away.
And that smile thing you talk about, whether it be brass or woodwinds, too many directors teach that smile, and we got to get people not to teach that smile, because that's the cause of almost every embouchure problem on any instrument that exists.
Yeah, the corners come down to create some tension. Don't go out.
Yeah. Right. And it's not natural for the smile to occur. The corners down is a natural feel for the muscular structure.
I also teach, and this Peter Bond really stresses this too, the singing trumpet, that the corners have to stay against the teeth sideways. Soon as they leave, we can't feel them as much and we start to smile. Jeff's really onto something here. That smile embouchure does ruin a lot of players.
Mm-hmm.
And it was taught, it's in books. I think it's in the Irons book, the famous lip slur book, Earl Irons. He actually, because that's how they did it back then. My trumpet teacher in high school played that way. And as he got higher, really thinned out his sound.
Yeah.
So yes, that's a huge point. Thank you, Jeff. I totally agree.
I like how you talked about the corners being against the teeth, because when you smile, they go away from your teeth, and rather than being anchored down.
Right.
So many of us have, 30 students in a room at a time, let alone one or two. So when you hear a kid play, what are some telltale signs of they're not tonguing properly? Like what do you hear the most common, and what are the easy band director fixes?
So this happened yesterday. I was at Westbrook Middle School with Mrs. Smith, and I was doing some testing. They have a karate where they get belts, colored belts. I love that system. The kids get excited. I had a girl come in and she was trying to play her test, and it was very apparent that she was not tonguing at all. I actually see this more in trombone players than I do trumpet, but in all the brass, I see it some. So literally she was pooing her notes. Poo, poo, poo. And they're very not accurate with the notes. They don't really know what's coming out. And she couldn't play the exercise. So, I spent some time with her trying to work on, teaching her about the front of the tongue and how it actually moves, and we don't just flatten our tongue. And by the end of it, she started to get it. But the first thing you'd hear if someone's actually not tonguing at all, if you watch them, they kind of bounce because they're taking a breath on every note.
Yep.
So it's like, hoo, 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 hoo. And it's easy to spot if you just ask them to tongue really fast, because they can't.
I had a student once when I was student teaching who hit it so well, and I couldn't tell he was doing it until we played Americans We, and he had to go bum 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 bum, and then he couldn't play anything. So you're right, the speed sometimes tells you.
So if I can share a quick story about how hidden this can be. A friend of mine who's got a music degree in music education, a bachelor's degree, great trombone player, wanted me to give lessons to his daughter. So I had him come in for the first lesson. He was a good friend. And his daughter wasn't tonguing. She played trombone. He played trombone. That's how insidious it can be. She wasn't tonguing and he didn't know it. And he was really embarrassed. I tried to tell him, look, I didn't know about this stuff either until I, did a lot of reading and asked a lot of people. So it can be that hard to distinguish, but you're right. As soon as they had the tongue fast, it rears its ugly head.
And you shouldn't see their throat moving we have a mutual student in our school whose throat moves.
Yes,
Right. So you shouldn't see that throat movement.
correct. And sometimes they will breathe on every note. Hoo, 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 hoo.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to spot after a while.
Alan, I'm not sure we've talked about this. When I play, the sides of both sides of my tongue touch my molars, my upper molars. And I can't, that for me, that kind of anchors my tongue. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
I think we have to go by sound. How do we sound? And, one of the things I have learned in the last 15 years or so is that because we all have different anatomy, that sometimes something that you might not think is okay if you sound good. Mm-hmm. So I think you sound good, so I don't think you should change anything.
Okay, I want to say this real quick. Do you mind if we share your email with people on this podcast in case?
Not at all.
I've
Not
got
at all.
a question that isn't being answered, and I want to reach out to you. You're okay with that? Okay,
so absolutely.
If you want to reach out to Alan, it's TRPT as in trumpet, TRPT King at gmail.com.
I have a question for Jeff.
Yep.
Jeff, how did you teach? Let's say, how did you teach clarinet tonguing, and how was that different from brass tonguing, or was it not different?
It's not different, and that's the thing that's really good about it. You talk about the M thing. We all use the system called A, P. So we taught the anchors right away at the beginning, and I taught trumpet and trombone and tuba, what have you, euphonium, the same way. And that's the nice thing. I think that everything you said, there's a direct correlation to how it should be taught within a woodwind or a brass. It makes no difference. It's just doing it. And you're 100% right. I watched too many of my colleagues worry so much about air, but never talk about the cause of the problem, which was the embouchure, or they'd try to blame it on a mouthpiece. And I'd say, okay, well, the mouthpiece house is okay, and your air is okay. So it can't be those two variables. So then what is it? You got to yes. and you got to fix that. The other thing with tonguing I found is that throat tonguers, they're coughing in the back. And I had a couple kids that got away with it for a while. And then I came up with a thing. Whenever a kid was tonguing and I first met them, I just took my two fingers and said, I'm going to touch on your neck. Just go ahead and play that part, just to make sure they weren't sneaking throat tonguing by on me, so I could catch that. But the put part, that's that doesn't come up as often in woodwinds as it does within brass. But yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. And these are things that we've been taught because of lack of problems a professor had, so they never decided to discuss the issue. And you're discussing the finite points of the issues, and I think it's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I wanted the teachers to hear that it's not that different from woodwind tonguing.
Right.
One of the things exercises Peter Bond does to get those corners down, I don't know if you've ever run into this, either of you, he puts toothpicks on either side, and then you got to grip them, and that also keeps the center relaxed.
Yeah.
Toothpick in either corner. It's funny because I bet you more than half the people who are listening to this podcast, when they listen to it, are making all these faces in the car or doing it. Like we're all making faces at each other. And if you're doing it as well, that's totally normal.
Yeah, I've done it too. I want to share another thing. It is possible for a kid in high school to reach a pretty good level of playing incorrectly. Jim Pandolfi talks about the great Mel Broyles, who played first trumpet in the Metropolitan Opera for like 50 years or something. And Mel didn't play correctly. So he had to practice 7 to 10 hours a day in order to do his job. He would talk about how, if this is ridiculous, Jeff, you'll love this. If he started to have trouble, he would actually move the mouthpiece to another part of his lip until the dead part came back. And sometimes it took months. So he played so wrong that he was damaging his lip, but he found a way to to play the job. So he didn't play correctly.
I have an amazing friend from college who's always been way better than I've ever been. And he's a dear friend of mine. He plays directly off to the right side of his mouth because of two things. One, I believe he had a tooth that was like kind of in the wrong spot. But even more importantly, he was blind out of one eye. So he had to turn his nose to the left in order to be able to read the music. So he put the trumpet forward and it was out of his right. The guy sounded fantastic. So, Dr. Stivler, a great trumpet teacher at UNH, never changed his embouchure because you're right, he sounded great. But, most kids would see that and that would not be what we want.
So I'd like to talk about that. That's a nice segue into that discussion. So you will have a kid occasionally that has, like, Jeff, you may know this. I think they call it an occlusion, where you have one tooth sticking out more than another.
Yes.
And if it's a front tooth that's bent and sticking out, they can't put the mouthpiece in the center.
That's right.
If you look at what's that? Chris Bodie. Look at pictures of him and look at his ring. It's way off to the side. And there's all kinds of people that have had that issue. I had a student that had an occlusion on his front teeth. He would cry if he played in the center. He plays way on the side. He made All-State every year. He's the best player at his college, and he's not even a music major. I mean, he figured it out. So you have a kid where you force them to play in the center and they quit, or you let them find a spot that's more comfortable and let them play.
And you mentioned Chris Bodie. He still has, to this day, my favorite version of the national anthem. There's one from
yes.
If anybody's heard that. It's like, it makes the trumpet sound like the easiest thing ever, and it's just so emotional. It's not flashy, but it's so good. So if anybody wants to check that out, I suggest you do. And Alan, I know I don't want to forget the quick discussion about braces, because this is the killer, especially for trumpet players. I know for you and I, we've had a number of students, and sometimes they work through it. Sometimes we move them to trombone or euphonium while they have braces, and then they move back. But can you help those teachers who are dealing with students with braces?
Yes, I have 3 words: Invisalign, Invisalign, Invisalign. Invisaligns are the braces that look like a mouth guard, and they put them in and they gently change the teeth, and they keep changing them. They're removable. So braces, I mean, trombone you can get away with because the mouthpiece goes above and below the braces. It's still not great, but I've had some trumpet players that it was just impossible for them to play. And remember, we're trying to say M, but the braces actually push the center of the lips forward. Yeah. The lips don't go forward and have the aperture stay the same. As they go forward, the aperture opens.
Yeah.
So braces automatically put the embouchure in a bad position.
On the braces thing, the Invisalign is 100% correct. Plus, they make that one where kids who had metal braces, they have that clear plastic clip that goes right over the braces. Yeah. Years ago, when we first started teaching, we used wax. Well, that went over like a lead balloon, but we did.
Yes.
But I also found out the problem was that you didn't want kids to quit, so you found every way to get them around it. But the other thing that occurred was that when they came off, all of a sudden they had all this space that they haven't had for months. And sometimes that was more frustrating for the child than it was having the braces and teaching them to once again anchor and just go back to slow tones and practice anchoring and keeping it going and saying, listen, it's just got to fall back in place. Give it a little time. And your point about teeth, dental structure is probably one of the bigger problems we run into. And
yes,
my middle son was a euphonium player, and he never got braces because he said to me, Dad, I don't want braces because it's going to change where I'm going to put my mouthpiece. And he studied with Al Raff and Andy Rogers down in New York, and he said, no, don't get braces. And we said, don't get braces. He's okay now, but the thing is that's something that we run into, and we have to talk through it with parents and kids and get them to understand that it's not the end of the world. It's just a temporary time.
Right. I hope all the band directors really rewind and hear what you just said several times, because you are so spot on. It is such an issue. And I had a kid, he got braces in high school. Oh, here's the other tip, parents or band directors: get your parents to get the braces on at a younger age, if possible, not sophomore in high school. Yeah. I had a kid have him taken off. He was just miserable, and his parents took him back, said, take off the braces. They can be a huge problem, especially with a good player. They get so discouraged. And no matter how much we tell them, it's going to be okay, I'll help you. Boy, when the notes aren't coming out and you were first chair, it's really tough.
So,
Really tough.
Yeah, Jeff, go ahead.
Have you had to, I know how I've dealt with it, which has not always been successful, but kids who come down with TMJ.
I've only had one.
Yeah, that's probably the most discouraging thing, because sometimes you can't find a solution to that jaw placement problem that they're having, and the dentist can't. And that's something that band directors, you need to look at very carefully and talk with the parents and talk with the dentist about it.
Agreed. And here's one thing that I think, especially like middle school band directors can do. Sometimes we work too hard to get a kid to get their bell up. Mm-hmm. So I know I can't do visuals, but I had a student one time whose back teeth were a half an inch behind his top teeth. Mm. So his mouthpiece, his bell had to point down if they wanted him to read the music. If he held his bell at a normal position, he was looking at the ceiling. Yep. So yes, there are kids that are lazy and they let the bell hang down. That's wrong. But just be careful of the kid that's forcing the bell up. And then what they do is they push their bottom jaw out. And like Jeff said, that unnatural position can create TMJ, because they have to have, the mouthpiece has to sit on both sets of teeth. So if you get the bell up, if that bottom jaw has to come out to meet the mouthpiece, or they're not gonna be able to play. Yep. So we have to be careful about that.
So the natural, my feeling has been that the natural position of the trumpet is slightly below parallel, because most people, and if you just ask them to bite down, if they have a natural overbite, which most people do, I was one of those players who put it just below parallel, but I can raise it up to make it flat or above for anything that's needed without kind of messing up what I have, because I have a fairly typical easy embouchure, I think. But you're right, when students put it up, what they do is they put too much pressure on the top lip, right? So then it doesn't buzz and they get a super thin sound. And if maybe this can be a segue for us into talking about a thin sound and sound in general, I think when there's too much pressure on the top lip and they're sticking the bottom jaw out, it just cuts off everything, right? So if anybody was to free buzz and they just go like that, and then if you just touch the top lip, it just stops it altogether. So that, that's really important that we check. And if they do have an underbite, which is pretty rare, if they have an underbite, then the horn will come up a little bit. But it's really important that whatever their natural teeth position is, that's where it stays when they play the instrument.
This is interesting too. I love that you just did that. If you buzz again and you try to stop your bottom lip and you blow a little harder, you can still buzz. The top lip stop.
Yeah.
But you touch the top lip, done.
Yeah.
So I did read once that the bottom lip they said take more abuse. I don't like that term, but I think you can put a little more pressure on the bottom lip and still get a buzz.
And in general, do you teach trumpet half and half, and then horn 2/3 upper lip, 1/3 lower lip?
I don't think it's as crucial on trumpet. I think you should play where your teeth go. But on horn, it seems like they get more of the traditional horn sound if they're a little higher on the top lip. What do you think, Jeff?
I agree with you in both cases. The French horn, you need it up higher. The trumpet, I tried to always do 50-50, but after watching some kids in their dental structure, I just said, okay, you're getting a better sound doing it that way. Let's go that way. And then I'd call one of my buddies and say, you got time to come over and listen to this child and give me your opinion about what you think, and go from there.
All right. So when Alan wrote about pinch sound, he said causes of pinch sound. He put center of lips too tight. We've talked about that with the smile embouchure. Number 2, not enough vibration. Number 3, too much mouthpiece pressure. We haven't talked about that yet. And teeth too close together. And I really like that one, the number 4, because I don't think about teeth almost at all when it comes to my embouchure. But the solution is very simple. You just slightly open your teeth. Right? So that's something I need to try more, is if a student is getting this pinch sound of can you just open your teeth a little bit more? I mean, I don't even think about the teeth, but that's great. So can you talk a little bit more about pinch sound, Alan?
Yes, and we do have to be careful about the teeth because a small adjustment will make a difference. And kids that play with their teeth too far apart, that's also a problem with range because it increases the size of the inner oral cavity, which is a lower note. So, but the number one, at least in my students, the number one reason for a pinch sound is the lips are really, really tight. Mm-hmm. And so the center is really tight, especially when I talk about that with kids. I don't talk, the corners can be tight, that's fine.
Yep.
It's the center that we want to make sure it can vibrate. So when the embouchure is really tight by either smiling or jamming the lips together, then they can't get the air through.
It's really hard because if it's not, a lot of times if it's not tight, it goes to being loose and being nothing. So I often teach that the corners and your belly button are the only thing that should be tight, right? Because if the belly button's like pushing air and supporting, and then the corners are tight. So the middle needs to be flat against the teeth, but not, it should be firm, but not tight.
Right. And as far as the mouthpiece pressure, when we don't start with an M, with the lips lightly touching and we blow them open, that's what I tell the kid, lightly touching in the center and we blow them open. If they start with them open, then, so if you think about this, if you're cooking pancakes, right? And you pour the batter in the frying pan and you make a nice thick pancakes. When you flip them, they can be, I don't know, an inch apart. But when you flatten them, they come together a little more. And that's what the kid's doing with pressure. Their lips are starting to open. When they press, it's like pressing down on the two pancakes, and it will bring the lips a little closer together. If they just start closer together, they don't have to press as much. But, you know, Peter Bond said something great. He said, every trumpet player wants to be able to play with a better sound, better range, better endurance, but they want it to feel the same. Yep. And that's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. We have to live with that uncomfortable feeling at first. And Jeff said it perfectly. How does it sound? How does it sound? Mm-hmm. And if they sound good, if they can live with that uncomfortableness for a short time, that's the way to go.
Do you think when you're getting the kid to initially buzz, I found this to be the problem. If I have the kid hold the mouthpiece with two fingers and begin their buzzing, they don't learn to press. But you watch a tinier kid, they'll grab the mouthpiece like this, and then they're going to jam it in their face. So I made fun of them. I bring a cup of tea and I say, drink your tea like this, hold your mouthpiece like this. So they didn't have the strength to jam it into their face.
Jeff, I think you and I were brothers in another life. Yes. Also, I have them hold it further down the shank, because then if they press, their fingers will slide up.
Oh, that's a good idea.
But yes, one finger is a great idea. You're right that you can't press holding it like that.
Yeah.
All right.
But that lower shank, that's a great idea. I never even thought of that.
Yeah, it'll slide right up. And you tell them you got to get a sound without your fingers moving. Yeah. So thank you for that. That's perfect.
Well, thank you.
So for mouthpieces, I think the typical thing, I don't know who subscribes or not, but the common mouthpiece is the Bach mouthpiece, or Yamaha or whatever. But the number that kids typically start on is 7C. And then, because in here, one of the issues you have to a small sound is they possibly could be ready to move to a bigger mouthpiece. And, usually after a couple of years, sometimes students move to what's called a 5C, or then maybe eventually a 3C. But at the same time, those are all Bach mouthpieces. I personally don't sound good with Bach mouthpieces, and a lot of people, sound good on other ones. So I know there's conversion charts for, different types of mouthpieces and all that. But at what point do you feel like students are ready to move from their beginner mouthpiece to a step up?
Good question. First, to help the band directors, this is so misunderstood. There are two major numbering systems with mouthpieces. There are others, but there are two major: the Bach system and the Schilke system, which Yamaha uses. and they're opposite. In other words, in a Bach, a 7C has a smaller diameter than a 5C. In the Schilke numbering system, the 7's bigger. So you got to understand the numbering system before you decide which way to go. And then with the Schilke system, like you can have a 14A, 4A, you can have all these variables.
Mhm.
So the reason why mouthpieces are so tricky is because, you know, we talk about the diameter of the cup and the depth of the cup. That's kind of what we talk about. But there's the shape of the rim. Sometimes the inside part of the rim is lower. Sometimes it's a little higher, and that can affect how a person plays. Rims can be wider or thinner. So how that touches our lips for some kids can be a big deal too. You've got U cup, which is most Bachs, but then there's a V cup. You know, the mouthpiece I play on commercial work, Marcinkowitz, it's a V cup. Then you have the modified V cup. So this, and then you have the Parduba double cup. So there's all these variables. To make it easy, if a kid's playing a 7C and you feel like all of a sudden their lip slurs get a little tougher to come out, especially going up, and you know they're playing correctly, just move them to a 5C. You know, some kids will do better on 3C, but just go one step bigger. And I think the Yamaha tends to put an 11B4 in the beginners. And I've had good luck moving to the 13B4. And one of the reasons is if you keep the B4, there's not as much of a change. It's just a diameter change. If you change the second letter and the second number, you've changed the size of the throat and the depth of the cup. And for some kids, that's too much. So 7C to 5C, you're just changing diameter. 11B4, 13B4, you're just changing the diameter. I would do that first before you change anything else.
One thing that I would suggest to people, because Alan and I have done this together a lot, but I've had to do it alone, and Jeff, I'm sure you've done this. You know, if you get your local music dealer to give you their mouthpiece kit, or basically loan you, you know, everything they have for mouthpieces, and you sit down with a student and just have them try all these different mouthpieces, and you ask them to play some things that are, you know, exposing for them, whatever range, whatever level they're at. Ask them to play some slurs and listen to their sound. You can hear what you think sounds best, and then they can also feel what they think sounds best. And in a most basic format, if you as the teacher, whether you're a brass teacher or not, and them as a student do this together, you'll probably come up with one that is kind of mutually agreed on as the one that the student likes the best and you think sounds really good. And more often than not, that's the one to go to.
Yes, definitely. And I want to be clear, if the other things we've talked about today aren't happening, a mouthpiece change isn't going to matter, and it could make it worse.
Yep.
So the embouchure that, you know, has to be set first. I want to share another quick story because I think this is really important. Guy that taught trumpet at the University of North Texas, which, you know, at one point was the best, certainly jazz school in the world. You can argue about that, but their trumpet teacher there, the local in Denton, Texas, the local hospital had bought a fluoroscope, which is kind of a moving X-ray. And the trumpet teacher would bring famous players in, and he'd ask them to go to the hospital with them, and he'd have them play with the fluoroscope. He was, you know, trying to compile some data. And the great soloist Maurice Andre came, and he had Maurice Andre go into the fluoroscope, and he said, before he went in, he said, what does your tongue do depending on what range you're playing in? And Maurice Andre said, my tongue is always flat. It doesn't, the middle of my tongue doesn't move. Okay, so they do the fluoroscope. He pulls, it was VCR then, pulls the tape out that they just recorded, puts it in the player and shows it, and his tongue's going up and down all over the place. And they said, well, this is showing that your tongue, he said, that's not my video, you've made a mistake. In his mind, his tongue didn't move.
Yeah.
So sometimes you'll get a kid that doesn't sense that stuff, and it's really hard to get them to fix it.
Yep.
See it.
You know, on the mouthpiece thing, I think you're right. What we did in my district was we started kids on 7Cs, then we moved into 5Cs, and then if they weren't studying privately, we had a complete Marcinkiewicz kit, and we just sanitize them and we go through the kids to see if we could find something that fit them. And I'd say majority of my kids played on Marcinkiewicz, but the thing we had was we had two guys in town who were students at Herseth. And so they had the whole Schilke thing. So I had a group of kids that were Bach believers, and I have a group of kids that are Schilkes. And I said, listen, let's not get into this. As long as you sound good, I really don't care. And but it's an interesting philosophical story that goes along with that. That take way too long to talk about here, but it's a cool thing to see the kids getting different experiences with different mouthpieces with different people. My biggest concern is the person that has 6 mouthpieces, and when they go to a gig, they try one. Oh no, I'm going to try this one. Try this one. I said, just pick one blooming mouthpiece and play, please.
My trumpet teacher in high school had a belt with pouches on it, and he'd play the first hour with one mouthpiece, put that away, grab the second one. He changed mouthpieces as the gig went on. It was crazy.
Sounds like a reed player trying to change the reeds because the reeds start dying as you're playing the gig.
That's right. And by the way, for commercial work, I play a Marcinkiewicz, the Bobby Shoe #2. It's a great mouthpiece. And I play, there's a guy in Kentucky named Peter Pickett. And a lot of the top pros are going to his mouthpieces. He was made a ton of money in tech work and bought a $500,000 mouthpiece making computer, and that's what he does now. And my teacher Phil Snedeker went down. He said, it's really cool. You'll try one, and then you tell him what you want, and he goes over and he puts in some parameters, and he throws your mouthpiece in the pile, and they melt it down again, and then they make another one. And just keeps doing that till he finds the right variables. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk buzzing a little bit. I think some band directors will have the kids buzz alone, but I was always taught that the mouthpiece is the instrument, and the instrument is really just the amplifier. So some things about buzzing: there is a great apparatus called the burp, BERP, that can clip onto your lead pipe, and then students play it, and it feels like you're playing the trumpet. That is a great device. But when I play the trumpet, I think I got this from the Jack Stamp method. It's basically 3 ranges to the trumpet, and they're centered around E. So if you have E bottom line, that's sort of like the top of the low register, and there's a natural break there. So a lot of your students will be able to buzz like above that. If you have them buzz like G, F, E, that's okay, but then they go to buzz D, and that's hard for them to get to. And then you'll notice a break on the E an octave above that at the top of the staff. So, I find as a band director and a trumpet player, I like to have students buzz along with what the woodwinds are playing so they can hear the pitch and they can match the pitch. And then also, having them buzz thoughtfully, so you have them buzz things you think they can buzz, not just whatever. If you ask them to just buzz low C or low concert B flat, they're probably not going to do very well. But if they can buzz maybe the 5th of the scale and move down and up with it, that works really well. And I also think asking them to buzz more and more and more, even if it's not always something you're listening to, is just really helpful for the centering of their pitch. And you'll find when they go to play a note, say super out of tune, because all of our players play sharp, right? And most band directors say, pull out the lead pipe. Well, you can tell how the brass section is going to sound. If all their lead pipes are out too far, everything's going to be pinched. So one thing I ask students to do is I ask them to play the note, and then have their mouthpiece loose while they play it on the trumpet, and then just slowly pull the mouthpiece out while they buzz the whole time and keep the pitch where it is. And usually you'll hear kids buzz, play the note, and then as they pull it out, the pitch will raise, which means they're too tight. So if you can get them to buzz, ba, and have it stay the same as it comes out, and then match it, then all of a sudden their tone and everything gets better. So the stamp book is something, or is it the buzzing book that I was thinking about? The John Thompson buzzing book. Maybe that's what I was thinking about. But can you give us some of your sort of band director 101 buzzing things that you believe?
Yeah, well, I think we have to be very, very careful with free buzzing, lip buzzing, because for some kids that will promote the pinch sound. Bobby Shoe says, I don't remember what note, but up to a certain note, if you buzz a note, when you pull it away, there shouldn't be any sound. It should just be air. Because if it isn't, you're too tight, like you said. So like, I'm buzzing a lower note. When I release it, it's just air. And if I was still buzzing my lips on that lower note, then I'm going to be in trouble as I go higher. So for some kids, lip buzzing works wonders. Mm-hmm. But if you got a kid with a pinch sound already, I wouldn't do any lip buzzing. Mouthpiece buzzing, yes, always. And the mouthpiece buzzing is where they can really work on changing tongue positions, because we're not locked into a note. You know, they might only go up a half step, but at least they can feel that motion of the middle of the tongue going up and down. Or for some kids, it feels like it's going forward and back.
So I'm going to jump in. A perfect exercise to have students buzz with the rest of the band is like a Remington exercise. So if you're on chord F and you go ba da dum da da dum, or even the ones that go like F, E, E flat, E, any of those, having them buzz those small half steps, well, even they'll be more in tune, but it'll also help open up their sound.
Yes, and I actually have kids at times buzz the mouthpiece in a mirror for a short amount of time, not too long, because you can get paralyzed. And just, I don't believe the mouthpiece is, the embouchure is stagnant, but buzz in a mirror and make sure there's not excessive movement when you change notes, excessive outward movement.
Yep.
Because a person that moves a lot, they're not going to be accurate.
Right.
You know, when the embouchure is moving all over the place and the tongue, it's like you're trying to hit a target with a bow and arrow, but the kid's running around with the target, you know.
Okay.
It's much harder.
Great. So when we're talking about strengthening those muscles, I'm going to put my plug in here. These are old-fashioned, but they go a long way. If you get kids to do long tones and lip slurs, and there's 1,000 different ways to do them, but if they're doing long tones either with a clock or just in band for a minute, or finding a way to do it so that they don't think they're long tones. You don't have to call them long tones, but just so they're holding soft and long and quiet with a stable sound, that really helps improve their strength, which is going to help everything. And with lip slurs, if you hear your students stop the air and separate the notes, especially as they go up, they're cheating. They also cannot tongue. They're cheating. It's like lifting a weight and having somebody spot you and help you, right? Mm-hmm. They have to do the lip slurs correctly. And even if it doesn't sound good, right, Alan? Sometimes lip slurs don't sound very good, but that's the way to get the embouchure strengthened, similar to clarinet.
Yes, very much so. And then, so let me have a plug for those of you out there that are teaching, you know, the younger kids especially. The thing brass players and teachers hate is you walk into a middle school band room and the brass players are warming up. They're tonguing really hard, really short notes. And I walk up to them and I says, how do you know what you sound like today? You're not playing a note long enough to hear how you sound. So teach your kids to play longer notes at a softer volume in their warm-up and listen. There are days when it takes me 7 or 8 minutes to get my sound. There are days when I never get it, and there are days when it's right away.
Yeah.
So try to get them to play longer notes, softer, and listen when they're warming up rather than pounding out their scales. And with a bad sound, by the way. And the first sound of the day is a bad sound.
The younger the student is, you have to do that in different ways to get them to do that. You know, sometimes you talk about sneaking, sometimes you talk about just other imagery to get them to play that without thinking that it's boring. And maybe you're talking 10 seconds and that's it for a fifth grader. Maybe for a fifth grader you're talking about 20 seconds, you know, and you slowly bring it up. You don't want to make the trumpet seem boring because you have to do long tones, but you do have to find a way to do it. To me, the number one way to get them to do it and have them love it is long note contests. Right? You like put a metronome on or whatever, and you say, let's see who's going to go the longest, you know? And then that's just like a competition, and that's always worked well for me.
If you can just make them aware from the very first note of the day to listen to what they sound like every day, just that will really help. because they don't think about it. They think about the physical playing. They don't think about listening to this sound, and the sound will tell you if there's problems.
All right, let's talk hand position real quick. My quick thing is same for trombone, same for euphonium, same for tuba, or maybe tuba a little bit differently depending on the type of tuba, and the same for trumpet. The left hand is going to hold the instrument. The right hand is going to play the instrument. So if you see kids who are holding the instrument with their right hand, meaning they're supporting weight, then we need to fix something. Now, sometimes in marching band, we actually need to do that for other reasons, but let's take that aside of things. If you go up and kind of yank a student's right arm off, it shouldn't move the instrument at all. So if the left hand is holding it, I believe having all the fingers together as you hold, say, a trumpet, but if the left hand is holding it best you can and the left shoulder and bicep is doing all the work. The right hand, if you flop it all the way down to the ground and let it just loose, will have just a natural curve to it. You bring it up and for trumpet, put the thumb underneath the lead pipe. For trombone, what do? We take 2 fingers on top of the thing and 2 fingers on below, and then use your thumb to kind of squeeze with the pads. Don't grab onto it like it's a turkey leg at Thanksgiving, right? And as you do that, you can use more wrist and less elbow. And stay nice and relaxed. So those hand positions I think are really, really important, because if, say, with trumpet, if you're trying to play a fast chromatic scale and there's any tension, they can't do it. But if it's relaxed, then they'll be able to move their fingers as fast as possible.
You will occasionally get a kid that their mouthpiece pressure is not even. And if you drop the pinky of the left hand down below, it will kind of relieve a little of that pressure and they'll get a better sound. But I always start with the normal, all the fingers up position. A little trick for trombone that I learned, if you get, this is a younger kid especially, but if you get a kid that tends to grab the slide, if you put a dime on the first knuckle coming down on the fingers and then put the slide on it and then have them grab with the thumb, if they drop that dime, they're grabbing too hard. So they're really conscious of holding onto that dime.
Interesting.
With the right 3 digits. It's pretty cool, actually, because they'll drop it at first. But
what I used to do with my trumpet players, beginning trumpet players, I'd take a cork and put it inside the ring so the pinky couldn't go in there and yank the horn in. And I just left the cork in there for a while so they got used to it, so they learned the flexibility. And then I'd show them when you anchored your pinky, that your third finger couldn't move as well, to show them that. And then
I love that.
The only thing I did differently with trombone, and maybe this is what you said, I just misunderstood. I just had with the left hand, the index finger went on top of the mouthpiece, yes. The other 3 went under. And then sometimes, depending on the kid, I have the pinky go below the slide so they couldn't get a good grip, so they could pull it against their face. And like tuba, it all depends on what kind of tuba you're playing. And with euphonium, it all depended on whether we were using bell upright, compensating valve, non-compensating 4-valve. We had to modify as we went along.
Yeah. And also, in euphonium and tuba at the higher levels, they're pulling slides while they're playing. So the left arm has to be kind of further into the instrument than they like to grab the bells sometimes.
Oh, yeah. One thing I have to say goodbye, gentlemen, but thank you very much. It's wonderful talking to both of you. Take care and have a great weekend.
Jeff,
thank you, Jeff. You too.
Take care.
So real quickly on the valve thing, as we're talking about hand position, we never want the valve, unless we're doing a horse whinny, we never want the valve to be in the middle. We want it to be on top or pressed all the way down, which is why we want to be firm with our valves and playing them almost as loud as we can, which is why a standard trumpet exercise is to play a technique exercise as soft as you can and making your valve actually louder than your sound. Right? And
I think he was your first instrument teacher, Mr. Furman, John Furman.
Yes, the great John Furman.
John really promoted slamming the valves. Yep. And he's right. And then I heard Alan Vizzuti say the same thing. Some guys talk about feeling it hit, like you can feel it when it hits. You're right. If those slide up at all, it affects our sound. And also,
if your hand position's in the wrong spot, then your valves will stick. If you're not pushing kind of straight down, that you're pushing sideways, the valves stick.
Right. It either pulls the valve, which makes it go sideways, or it pushes. And both of those, right. We talked to a student this week that said, when I pushed the valves down right on my new trumpet, the valves work fine, but when I don't, they stick.
Yep.
So yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
And you can have kids make a claw or a C.
Yep.
And then just move it onto the trumpet with the right hand.
What I find helps kids too, I know we're talking a lot of trumpet, but I know what find if I pretend to throw them a tennis ball and they go to grab it, and they use all 5 fingers to grab it, and when they go to put it on, when they push their fingers down, they kind of squeeze up on the thumb into the lead pipe, and it helps them push down harder. They're not just
absolutely,
they're squeezing, and that helps everything. When you if you look at good hand position and good embouchure, right? Tonguing to me is the part that is so tricky because you can't see it. But if you know, as a band director, you will get what you insist on, right? If you insist every single day you see them on good hand position and good embouchure, then you know that your brass players at least have a fighting chance.
Absolutely. And if you can get them to warm up the right way, even in band, then you can even listen while you're not acting like you're not paying attention. We can listen while we act like we're not paying attention, and we can pick stuff up that way too. Your bands are great. You teach that from day one, and
we try.
Yeah, and let me say to all you band directors out there, if you want to talk to somebody about how you take any instrumentation and make them sound good, talk to Kyle Smith, because I've been working for him for, I don't know, 16 years.
With me. You've been working with me.
With you. It doesn't matter what gets thrown to him. He gets them to get a good sound every year, year after year. And that is special and difficult. So they should talk to you about that if they need some help with that.
Appreciate that, Alan, very much.
Results are what matter, right?
Before we wrap up, is there anything we haven't talked about? Anything that you want to give to? And, even if the stuff we didn't cover, that's okay. But it's like maybe big picture things that you really wish band directors would do. Maybe let's think of it that way.
Yes, I think they don't talk about the embouchure enough, and I think partly because if you're not a brass player, it's hard to understand. So bring someone in that does understand, and we have to talk about the physical. We talk about air and the musical, and part of the problem is, especially at younger grades, you got to do a concert, so you can't talk about all this stuff every band rehearsal.
And it's easy to talk too much. So
yes.
It's hard to, can you say it in 6 words? Right? Like, can you know what to say and say it in 6 words?
Also, for me, teaching privately, can I say the same thing 5 different ways so that I find the way that they get it?
Because they're thinking about lunch the first 4 times. So the 5th time they might hear you.
Exactly. And the other thing, like with a small sound, sometimes that's just fear. Kids don't want to be heard. So sometimes if you put like a cup mute in or something, they have to produce more vibration to get that mute to vibrate. And if you demonstrate what the mute sounds like when you don't blow enough, or when you don't have enough vibration, and then what it does sound like when you do, you can get them to use more vibration without the fear of everybody hearing them.
Super. I've never done that before.
But the beginning of our conversation today, for the younger band directors, the ones that teach younger kids, that's the most important. Getting the corners against the teeth with an M position, and then teaching the tongue, middle of the tongue position to change notes. Those 3 things to me are the most important things. And if we just pound those, you'll get more good players.
Alan King, trptking@gmail.com. Reach out anytime. Also reach out to me anytime, smithk@westbrookschools.org. We're happy to take requests and answer questions and all that. So until next time, everybody, thank you very much. Alan, talk to you later.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe too. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, if you have the time, we highly recommend the After Sectionals podcast for more great listening. Thank you for listening to the Growing Band Director. See you next week.